Good morning, and it's Peter Zellum's Griniflix Adventure 8, and today I'm doing a lens comparison. It's actually the Leica 21mm f2.8 Elmarit compared to the Leica 21mm f1.4. I have got a whole bunch of expectations with this lens. It's going to be interesting to see whether it stacks up. What I like about this focal length, obviously I've shot all focal lengths, 35, 50, 28, 24, 16, all sorts of scenarios. The 21 is a great focal length for street photography and for landscape and for events, parties and social gatherings and events like that. I like the Elmarit 2.8 because of its compact size, but I'm a sucker for lenses that are really fast and wide open so that you can shoot in low light conditions. Particularly important if you're using film, because film you're governed by whatever ISO rating you're using on the film. So if you're using 125, well then you're restricted to slow shutter speeds, and the wider the aperture you can get, the better. So the lens I'm comparing this to is the 1.4 version 21mm Leica, the Summilux. It's going to be interesting to see how the detail stacks up and how the two lenses comparison. So I've set up a bit of a scenario here. I'm using the Leica M240p, Summilux 1.4 on there already, and you can see the setup that I've got. I've tried to get some detail here, some color charts, some background there so you can see my office, a bit untidy, cameras and things around the place. Yeah, so my initial thoughts, why I didn't go for the Summilux in the first place, the 21mm f1.4, and I went for the 2.8, and I guess I'm buying these lenses also pre-owned, and therefore it's a bit more economical to buy rather than just new outright. I thought, well, at 21mm, is it really that important to have a really fast lens? 2.8 is fast enough for most scenarios. Camera shake is limited. You can, probably handhold 21mm down to about 1/10 of a second quite easily without any stabilization involved. So the question was, why do I really need 1.4? And I guess the big difference there again is it's a faster lens, 1.4 versus 2.8, so 2 stops faster. So that means instead of using, say, 1/4 of a second, you can use 1/16 of a second. So it's easy to hold 1/16 than it is 1/4. But I wonder, how important is that depth of field? How much difference is that depth of field between 2.8 and 1.4 at 21mm? So that's the type of things that I'm looking for and to find out in this lens comparison. Let's take some shots and see how things stack up. Alright, well, some interesting observations straight away. I've put the Elmarit on, and what I've noticed, and you'll see this when I'm in Lightroom, and if I look at the corners here and then go back to the Summilux, there's a slight difference in how much you get in. So the Elmarit is 1 or 2mm wider than the Summilux. So the Summilux is correct at 21mm, then the Elmarit's maybe 20 or 19. You'll see that in Lightroom as well. What do you reckon? Would you go for the Summilux 21mm 1.4? Are the benefits strong enough there for you to pay the price difference? Huge price difference. I think this lens is probably about 10 years old or so. The current version is the 3.4. So the current version is a compact one. The Summilux, on the other hand, is a bigger lens. You can see the lens hood takes up that much on both the lenses. Summilux stands by another, say, 20mm. Again, just adding that extra size. The ones in the pink are the 21mm f1.4 Summilux lens. And then the ones here in the yellow are the Leica 21mm f2.8 Elmarit. So there are more of the Summilux, of course, because we've got a couple of extra stops. We'll have a look at the Elmarit first. So this is at 2.8. Now, as we flick through to 4, you notice straight away between 2.8 and 4 that the level of vignetting has been reduced. So you can see at 2.8 it's a bit darker on the sides, and when you go to f4 it starts to reduce, f5.6 even a bit more, and so forth right up to 16. And then if we just go back to 2.8 again, having a look at the detail and the contrast is the thing I'm looking for now. Contrast across all those apertures are really good. So again, back to 2.8. Colors are great in my opinion. Quite a bit of detail to the edges here. Obviously, as we start moving towards the front of the image here in the out of focus area, as well as in the back here, you can see how much is in the background that's in focus or starting to get out of focus. But as we go to 4 and 5.6, you can see the background starts to become more clear as the depth of field increases, and the foreground starts to become more clear. You can see from the ruler here. And then when we go to right up to f16, you can see we've got quite a bit of detail everywhere. I mean, right here in the foreground, you can see how much detail we have there as well. So that's the quick view of the Elmarit. We now have a look at the Summilux. We'll start from 1.4 full frame. So again, we notice some vignetting straight away at 1.4. A lot more is out of focus, as you would expect at 1.4 in the background and also in the foreground. If we go to f2, you can see the vignetting is reduced quite substantially just from those 2 points, and then 2.8. And then as you continue up to 16, there is not much change in the vignetting at all. The contrast across all the apertures, in my opinion, is very good. So again, back to f1.4, and you can see as far as the out of focus area, the bokeh is quite strong, both background and the foreground at 1.4. And then as we move into the higher f-stops, increasing the depth of field right up to f16, and we've got a lot of detail here at f16 right to the very background as well. How do they stack up against each other? 2.8 against 2.8. Select the Summilux at 2.8, Elmarit at 2.8. We'll go somewhere in the middle. They're very similar. Hard to tell them apart at this point in time. We're zoomed in at 300%, so if we go to 100%, they are fairly identical at 2.8. Contrast is good, detail is good, and this is a bit more in focus than that. Again, so similar. And if we go across to the other side, as you would expect, also very similar as far as in the area of focus. The background seems to be more blurred out with the Summilux than it is with the Elmarit. You notice here with the Nikon camera as well as the tissue box over there. Elmarit is actually wider than the Summilux. So there's probably about 1 or 2 millimeters difference in the actual focal length of the two lenses, depending on which one you take as a reference. If we take the reference of the Elmarit at 21 millimeters, then the actual focal length of the Summilux is 22 or 23. If we take the Summilux as being the reference at 21, then the Elmarit is actually a bit wider at either 19 or 20. And f4 for the Elmarit, and do side by side. And again, we get outstanding results for both lenses. Good contrast, good detail across the whole width of the photograph that's in the focal plane. Again, more out of focus in the background. So I guess the bokeh is stronger in the 21mm Summilux compared to the Elmarit at matching apertures. There's probably another conclusion we can make there. 5.6, the depth of field starts to increase, details much the same, bokeh in the background, a bit more defined as you would expect in the Elmarit, even at the same aperture. But now they're starting to become more similar, which you would expect also as we start to go up into as we increase our apertures. Go to f11 for both lenses, side by side, and as you would expect, the depth of field becomes huge in the corners. The detail in both lenses and the color is pretty much identical. The depth of field starts to increase. You can see here on the ruler as well, so as far as the focal length of both lenses, even though both are 21, you can see here we get to 420 on the ruler. That's the 420 mark there, and it goes that much wider on the Elmarit. f16 on both lenses. Again, the detail is great, color is great, contrast is great, depth of field is huge. Both lenses are pretty much identical across the range, except for obviously fully open. One is 1.4, the other is 2.8. Let's do another comparison. The 1.4 on the Summilux and the 2.8 on the Elmarit. So now we're taking full advantage of the wide open lens shooting 2 stops faster, Summilux. So the thing that I'm looking for is contrast and detail. And in both cases, both lenses stack up quite well shooting wide open, in my opinion. If we go closer to the edges here, you do notice some dropping off here, depending on how I focus. Some areas might be a little bit more in focus than others. You can see that's a little bit more in focus than that. Very similar here. Similar focus, I think, here, but you notice the bokeh starts to climb in here because we're shooting at 1.4 versus 2.8. And you notice it obviously in the ruler here and in the patterns here. Also with the photography news here, you notice it there as well, how it's becoming out of focus because of narrower depth of field. We'll have a look at the background. Me, myself, I on the motorbike here, and the bokeh becomes much stronger, as you would expect, of course, on the Summilux. And here again, as a comparison, and we'll do the 1.4 on the Summilux with f2.8 on the Summilux, and see what we notice. Straight away notice the vignetting on the side has been reduced. You can see the difference there. A bit more detail also on the sides. In the center there, it's very similar. But the bokeh in the background, even at 2.8, is actually quite interesting. Do both lenses have a purpose for me? Good question. I'll think about it. What about you? What do you think? Maybe you want to comment, give me your thoughts on that. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate your support on my channel. If it's the first time to my channel, please do subscribe. I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye.